In today's video, we're going to discuss on how to find the most profitable markets in 2025. It's the most frequently asked question that I receive every single time. And this is why I wanted to create this video to go over all of the different strategies that I use going into 2025. This is going to be the most important way to figure out how to find and section off the most profitable short-term rental properties and how to avoid restrictions and how to not get caught in the saturated market that there is from other people. So guys, what I like to use is called the 30-minute mile radius formula. And in this formula, we're gonna analyze how to section off the most profitable properties, and it all starts with picking a city. This city could be any city in the entire country of the US. It could be Miami, Florida, it could be DC, it could be New York, it could be any city that you want in the United States, and that is totally up to you. But what you want to do is to not focus on those cities, but rather go into other areas outside of those cities to target those medium markets and medium locations. And the entire purpose of this is to avoid restrictions, but also to avoid competition, because everyone has properties in the cities. The way that most people think is that these cities are going to be highly profitable areas, but what ends up happening in these zones is you're gonna see a lot of competition and saturation and restrictions. So that's why I like these suburban markets outside of these areas and outside of these cities. A lot of cities are also restricted and you may need permits, and it's gonna be a lot more difficult to get into the Airbnb market, while these suburban areas won't require any of that. And when it comes to permitting and restrictions, there's 3 tiers that you need to be considering and worrying about in 2025. This tier 3 process has to be something that you as an investor need to consider before getting into any particular Airbnb market. And it's what I look at every single time before I analyze or underwrite any properties, before I even get started cold calling or doing acquisitions or reaching out to landlords. And the zones that have the higher tiers are the more restricted areas. So you want to avoid areas like tier 3, such as areas like New York or LA that have a lot of short-term rental restrictions. Usually these areas are totally banned and they won't let you do Airbnb or any sort of STR in these areas. A tier 2 restriction is gonna be a permitting zone that's gonna require more than 30 days on a wait list, which means in this area, in order to get a property under contract, in order to run your STR effectively, you need to get a permit. Otherwise, it's gonna be completely illegal for your property to get listed. So you wanna be very careful of tier 2 areas as well. This is an area that I would personally try to be very careful on so that you don't get caught into other restrictions and in other zones that you don't wanna be in. Now, tier 1 is the easiest zone that has no restrictions. In tier 1, it's what I call a free market, which means anyone can get in, operate their business, scale their business, and run their business. Now you may be thinking to yourself, well, Reed, tier 1 sounds great because I can go in, start my business, and operate it smoothly. But that is completely wrong, because in 2025, most tier 1 zones and areas are concentrated and saturated, and you want to try to avoid them. Because tier 1 is a free market that gives anyone access to run, operate, and start their business, makes it more competitive, which is something that you want to avoid, because in business there's already enough competition and you don't want to make it more difficult for yourself. So what I like to focus on is targeting those areas that require tier 2 permits, but don't require them to be restricted, nor are they free markets. So you want to be in that middle area, which is very, very important. Finding properties in tier 2 are going to be in less competitive and saturated environments, which will scare off other newbie investors and will allow more of a bottleneck functionality to the market to allow a barrier to entry to be a little bit higher for those newcomers. That will allow you as an average beginner investor to start making more money when you're starting off in your STR business. So remember this, Always go for tier 2 markets. Try to avoid tier 1 and tier 3 as best as possible. Now guys, once you're in a tier 2 zone and in a tier 2 market, you now have a competitive edge over other people. So congratulations. This is gonna be the prime time that you should now be blitzing that area and finding as many properties as possible and cold calling as many landlords as possible. But remember this, when you're cold calling landlords, you wanna make sure your numbers are underwritten before you actually pick up a phone and call someone, because time is money and you don't wanna be wasting your time calling landlords on properties that aren't even profitable, that won't make you a single dollar in your pocket. So the way to underwrite deals, to make sure that you have a competitive advantage over other investors, is to make sure that the revenue of a particular property is gonna be double of what the rent is. I call this the double revenue to ratio formula. It's a very simple formula, and if you follow it closely, you will be able to find a successful Airbnb property that can make you $2,000 to $3,000 of profit. This is gonna be example number 1 of a profitable property, and it's gonna be a property that has a rent of $3,000 a month. And the revenue of this property is gonna be $6,000 a month. Well guys, let's think about our operating expenses for an average Airbnb property, right? We're gonna need cleaning, we're gonna need to pay for utilities, and we're gonna need to pay for Airbnb's fees that many people don't take into consideration, and we're also gonna have to pay for property insurance. Guys, cleaning cost is the most expensive cost that comes after your rent payments on a monthly basis. And many people don't know this, but cleaning costs are covered by the guest, but you have to factor it into an expense, because as it comes in for revenue on the property, it goes right back out as an expense because you have to pay your cleaners. So most of the time, you have to break even on the cleaning, which means part of the $6,000 has to come out and be considered as an expense. So cleanings usually will cost you $150 per clean. An average Airbnb property that is somewhat successful gets 6 to 7 bookings a month. So you have to multiply this number by 7, which is gonna be roughly around $1,000. Average utilities for a property is gonna be around $500. This includes your electric, water, gas, sewer, and maintenance. Airbnb fees is gonna be 3% of the revenue of the property. So if the property is bringing in $6,000 a month in revenue, 3% of that is gonna be $180. Your insurance on a property the size of a 3 to 4 bedroom is gonna be around $97 to $105. Let's just go and do the average of $100. So guys, now instantly, off a property that brings you $6,000 of revenue, you're not gonna be taking home $3,000 of profit because you have to subtract it by all of these expenses. So guys, you're looking at $1,780 a month in expenses on this property. And this is obviously excluding rent, because rent's gonna be your biggest expense. So after the $3,000 in rent plus the $1,780 in operating expenses, which we call OPEX, guys, you're looking at a profit of $1,200 a month. Now guys, this is the minimum I'd ever go on an investment, because I want to at least make $2,000 to $3,000 in profit, but those are gonna be on the bigger 3 to 4 bedroom single family houses. This is under the impression that the property only brings $6,000 in revenue. My average property brings $8,000 to $9,000 in revenue, and some of my properties in Texas bring $12,000 to $13,000 a month in revenue. And obviously, those are the properties that you want to target, but I'm giving you guys a simple example on why it's important to make sure that the revenue of the property is at least 2x on what the rent is. Because at the end of the day, you have expenses that not many people take into consideration when running an Airbnb business. So guys, if you want to learn more about this process and how I'm replicating and duplicating this same exact blueprint, click the link down in the description below to join my mentorship program. You will be allowed to book a free consultation call with my team and I to figure out if this mentorship on working alongside me personally is going to be a good fit for you or not.